Welcome everyone to another fun video. The usual code, getting stuff like innovation and critical thinking here. Today not Mac OS or Windows, but also Linux. And I made already a couple of videos there on the main channel that I would in general suggest and advise a microkernel, and we'll work on that soon. Of course, there are microkernels for stability, right, if drivers crashes, but right now we need to use what we got here and also still develop our Linux distribution. So today in our Discord, or last night and yesterday and today, we built for 24 architectures, test quite some stuff, usually here on this channel, right, PowerPC, ARM, RISC-V, and then at users, stuff doesn't work, right? So what is the issue here? The issue is that this 15-inch PowerBook from 15 years ago, but it could happen with any device, right? Even your latest AMD GPU, think next year's hardware, and you try to load it, it doesn't work. So the issue is that the Linux starts, whether it's our precious T2 or any of the other 1952 Linux distributions. And the problem is, the recurring criticism here for me, that we have a monolithic single address based kernel. So everything from your MIDI driver, your HID keyboard driver, everything can memory clobber out of, or like you plug in a buggy or intentionally evil USB device, like next door's hacker, and takes over like an P3 or Xbox, your precious computer, which is why we would want microkernel, right? But even so simple things, and this is a recurring theme here, right? Innovation is only so skin deep, whether it is at Apple, although maybe a little bit more innovative there, previous video, certainly Windows or Linux. Basically, we're still stuck in 30 years ago, right? That's the stuff, and this is recurringly my point, right? With the microkernels, this should less happen most of the time anyway. Something. Of course, asterisk fine print applies. If your microkernel, like user space driver, crashes the GPU and the GPU locks a PCI bus for further transactions or stuff, then yeah, maybe we should also need to design better hardware. But at this point, so I don't know exactly what's going on. I'm pretty sure it's either the Radeon FB, Novo or whatever. I think they said it's a Radeon card in this one. But something is crashing, right? I mean, obviously. So that is, the boot is stuck at that. And it's like, no, I mean, I can't diagnose it from here. And the user thought super frustrating. I mean, not only for me, we build here everything and test here everything, and then it still doesn't work with all the 10,000 different or 100,000 different personal computer SKUs over the last 30 years. And while the innovation in the Linux kernel community is so amazing that news sites celebrate and applaud strange features, like the Linux kernel certainly has 10,000 strange things, like now, 30 years later, you can set the host name before user space starts. It's like, and people applaud this, and I mean, I never needed that. I don't know why I would need it. There is some use case where someone needed that. I mean, fine for them, but otherwise do it in the init.rd, or I don't know, this is so obscure. And otherwise, if you check with Red Hat's precious, expensive, also stuff, also, what would you do now, right? So you know the user, I mean, no normal user wants to debug this, right? No, not my father, not my wife, not a girlfriend, not your neighbor, not your best buddy, no sane normal person except like crazy geek developers. I mean, even I don't want to debug that, right? After 30 years, I expect that freaking Radeon and NVIDIA drivers finally freaking stable, just freaking work TM, and not in 2022 I still need to debug why some decade-old driver, the only constant is change and regressions, doesn't work anymore. And now the big name of Red Hat, now IBM Linux, it's like, yeah, you blacklist there's some module, right? It's like etc, module D or something, or udev, or the kernel parameter, even like arch stuff. But you don't, I told them, yeah, blacklist them, they try to blacklist something, still happens. Another user, because obviously T2 becomes popular, so if you don't know what T2 we're talking about, right, not the Volkswagen Combi, but of course our amazing Linux distribution here, which by the way is free. You can share, like, and subscribe, try it out, play along at home, send us more bugs. And even like on other popular Linux distributions, like Arch Linux is like, yeah, you blacklist that, right, in etc module D or conf or udev, any of those, or module underscore blacklist something. I'm not sure because I don't use that often, but I had similar experiences over the last years, even AMD GPU, right? So the problem is even when I had, yeah, the new RX 6700 XT or something, even that didn't work. Even there, I plugged it in, it booted, I had black screen, and it's like, basically here, so what happens here at this point, udevd is started, and udevd triggers cold, is it cold? Yeah, cold plug kind of new device event generation for example, module loading. So what happens here is all devices are reprobed again and modules potentially loaded. And that is where it's usually, so if it hangs at that line, it's usually, I mean, what else should it be except, sure, could be some kernel bug, general file system, user space scheduling, whatever, timer, bugs and whatnot, regressions, but usually it is some driver, and you don't need vintage and abandonware for that, right? You can have, I should usually have, I need a stock of chefs to hold the RX 6700 XT package into the camera, but it's 1 meter further. But you know how it looks. So, and in the case, this is also so bizarre. So it can happen, you use today's released Linux, so the state-of-the-art stuff. You next month buy the latest AMD or NVIDIA card, plug it in, and you have black screen in, for example, or even if you have like EFI frame buffer for early system boot output. For example, even the AMD GPU driver, maybe the new device support is there, it's half-baked, it's incomplete, you get black screen or garbled screen or stuff. And in my case with the AMD GPU, I didn't even know, so the latest driver was even there, but I never realized rebuilding the kernel 500 million times here live on this channel. Of course, I never look into the kconfig, I only look into the config or kconfig. If I'm missing something, usually we try to build everything as modular as possible, but I never realized for a year that there is a new option, like not modular option, but fixed config option of enabling and building this new display controller, I think DC or so. This is also crazy, right? You build this by default and then you build the AMD GPU driver with all the new Windows derived or something code shared display controller stuff. And I have even a solution to this, right? I don't know, am I a 10x engineer that I'm the only one who has like a this? I mean, the idea is so simple and obvious, right? Why do they not? You can, with a simple text file with each, why is there not like at least, I mean, the best answer in my opinion, of course, yes, performance, but freaking microkernel, right? That the stuff is more isolated and so on, and stable ABIs that last, and like for a decade tested driver, the decade tested driver still is compatible and freaking works TM, but and also address space isolated, stuff doesn't crash and clobber each other and so on. But the most trivial thing to improve this, and why has nobody freaking done that for 30 years, right? Is simply like safer module loading, that the module loading machinery, which aka is just a tiny little user space program that tells the kernel, hey, here's some data that I loaded from disk and can you load this into your kernel and like freaking execute it with kernel permissions in your ring 0 or privileged mode of other RISC CPUs. And it's so simple, right? Write to a freaking file, or aka glorified database, write to a file, last module tried, and if it crashes the machine, or like obviously sync it to freaking disk that the data is not in buffers and caches, but written and flushed to your storage medium, so that when it crashes, it is there on the next boot, so that you have like the last tried kernel modules, and if you boot and it's freaking in there, then you know it's the last time it didn't work, like aka Windows safe mode. I mean, with all those problems, right? I do Linux for 20 years, soon 25 years. I mean, obviously 25 years of such problems, right? I mean, who am I kidding? I'm building Linux distribution for 25 years. And like, why do we have in 2022, why does it need me live on YouTube? Why have, I mean, I don't know all the 1952 or whatever distribution we have right now, but neither IBM's Red Hat nor Arch Linux or who knows, I can't also try all the 1950 52 Linux distributions. Maybe some have some facility or stuff. But as far as I know, there isn't. And why is there? And the problem is also that we don't know the module, right? I mean, given that with other modern, I mean, also other innovations, right? We have systemd and amazing innovations like setting the host name on the kernel command line parameter stuff. But we have like systemd, but we don't have like not crashing your kernel, like your precious monolithic single address space kernel where everything can clobber each other and stuff. It is crazy. I'm somewhat tempted, and that is also why I didn't like write my microkernel yet, because I'm constantly having to fix stuff. Or I have no, I don't get paid for this. It's like my hobby, live on YouTube. Thanks for sharing, liking, subscribing. I don't really need to do that, but if I want to improve my Linux, which at least my friends say is best Linux distribution, then sure, I can, instead of writing my dream microkernel, now also implement like maybe a dozen of lines of code solution of 4 loading drivers through udev, not using, or actually nowadays I think udev even has, I need to check, I think udev is doing that internally now. Maybe we would need to patch udev, aka nowadays in other distributions they use the systemd variant, which is also crazy, right? That udev, not the Unix philosophy of modules and programs that have one function and doing that well. No, everything nowadays needs to be in systemd. So most likely it's not even, because previously, like until a decade ago or so, we were loading, like udev was calling modprobe for each invocation of those udev rules, of those matches. I think nowadays it is using libkmod or what it is. Let's maybe quickly check that. But the problem is, I mean, I can't obviously debug that for those users, because until recently I only had like 2. I mean, obviously I don't hoard everything. Space and time and money is also limited here. I have a, you know, that previous videos there on the more main channel, probably there, a G5 and a G4 tower and desktop and cube. I now got one, like for 15 years I didn't have a portable laptop thing. That's always a thing, right? To reproduce this. I mean, if I boot this on the G5 it probably works, if I boot it on the G4 it probably works. And now I got one more portable PowerBook. I mentioned recently Tybook, which I never had and I thought is nice. And probably it also just works. I mean, the last time I even booted that some 4 months ago and it booted fine. So I don't think I have a system to reproduce it here right now. Even other distributions like Arch, Debian or Oracle's Broken Linux can't have everything to reproduce, obviously. But yeah, I'm slightly, I mean, yeah, this is the stuff that we could do so much, but somehow, and that is so crazy, right? This is a 10,000, sure, we have innovation like systemd. I mean, sure, there are also other innovations like udev, which is a classic Unix system standard udev, but it took a crazy amount of time for udev innovation, which now is systemd, which obviously systemd produced quite some controversy and hate, which I personally also don't like the most, especially the monolithic everything in one kitchen sink udev thing. But yeah, we have such innovations here, and sure, there are other innovations like IOUring for high performance kind of vectored like batch system call, ring buffer processing stuff of avoiding system call context switching time. That are of course innovations, but things like this, sure, not everyone wants to run vintage and retro Apple Power PC hardware. But again, it can happen with every other hardware, right? It could happen with a network card. Basically everything can completely crash and deadlock your kernel, because single address space monolithic kernel where everything runs in one privilege ring security level. And yeah, we constantly rewrite stuff because Xorg was not good enough, and now we have Wayland, which is for 10 years incomplete and still misses features and doesn't work with vintage hardware and has complete unisolated performance for vintage and retro applications and loads and stuff like rectangular fills and brazen hemlines and stuff. Sure, there is some innovation, but is Wayland the best innovation? It's like, yeah, and for modern graphics it's somewhat better, but but that probably also answers why we don't have the year of the Linux desktop, right? We have 2022 still the thing that you can boot and maybe you don't have graphic output or it hangs and catches fire. So yeah, that's crazy, right? We can do so much stuff, including deleting on to do the other week. Save module loading. Because as I probably said, the user doesn't even know. Because, I mean, all right, I wanted to see, I probably didn't finish that sentence. Being a 10-time engineer, I sometimes don't finish sentences. Thinking too fast, probably faster than I speak. Because, I mean, I wanted to say probably 5 minutes ago that, sure, in other distributions you even have a splash screen, right? I mean, but even, I'm totally aware that other distributions might boot a tiny little bit differently with systemd and a splash screen. Although I like to see what's going on. But the problem is even that, even with this, you don't see what's going on. Maybe it would actually, as crazy as it is, I'm not even the greatest fan of splash screen because, I mean, who cares if there is some output on boot? I mean, I rather have some output and know what's going on than having a bloody splash screen and see nothing. But even with that, maybe we should actually at least modify that. I'm not even sure if it's that easy potentially, because it's probably the udev daemon that can't print directly to this console, most likely. But it would already solve half of the problem. At least as a status, you would see loading that driver, like maybe you would have seen on other vintage systems, even vintage Unix potentially. Because right now the user would need to boot specially, like init, booting, how to solve this now, booting with init equals bin bash, because right now the user, it's like, the user needs to educate themselves enormously about inner workings that they never wanted to know. Find a solution for that, which is difficult. You would need to boot with init bin bash. The other thing is, if you boot with init bin bash, you don't have a full login. I mean, you have this basic frame buffer console. You would still need to find out which module it is. So even that is tricky. I don't even have the best solution for that. Even I, with 25 years of experience, sure, you could start to mod probe modules and see which hangs, like mod probing Radeon. Because if you just run udevd or udev adm, what is it, start, settle, events, whatever is that. Actually, we could check that. Only live on this channel, fact checking everything has been seen. It's probably like system here. No, they say also changed, yeah, trigger. Did I say trigger? Maybe I said trigger. Settle, by the way, simply waits until this trigger is done and the event queue is completely, or not the trigger is done, that waits that the event queue is empty. To only continue booting when all the devices are initialized and your storage stuff is potentially there. Because if you just run udevd adm trigger, then you would still deadlock that. Even if you secure shell login, you most likely, often the stuff hangs the kernel completely, so you even potentially, you probably 50-50 chance that even if you have a secure shell login, that also dies with that stuff here, because often the stuff deadlocks entirely, especially with like old vintage stuff stalling the PCI bus for not completing transactions on the PCI bus. So I don't even have the best, like, except logging in somewhere with init equals bin bash. You can't just run udev, so you would need to manually maybe do that. Be my guest if you have better tips, what you suggest here. Certainly I will not Google around here for that. And that is the thing, right? Constantly improving the stuff, P3 stuff, updating our packages, making our T2 Linux distribution packages compile more, work more on PowerPC or P3, or basically, if you have not guessed yet, this is a full-time job running a Linux distribution, so don't try it at home, don't run a Linux distribution. Use T2, obviously, because it is the only distribution supporting 24+ architectures. And it's like, yeah, well, I turn to YouTube to finance the stuff, right? I could, of course, totally ignore that and not constantly better our Linux distribution. Download mirror. That was udev and probably kmod. I guess that has a library. We can also probably check the, in a second I check the comments. That would be PowerPC 32, but that totally doesn't matter. And you can't even say it, just make sure. I mean, first of all, we can't just like test, sure, 100% test coverage, but nobody, not even the most expensive like Oracle broken Linux, nobody has all this hardware, right? I have a lot of hardware. I probably have too much hardware. I'm even somewhat of, not the most hoarder, just like a little bit, somewhat reasonable collector, I would say. Although maybe my wife already calls me a hoarder. But even I don't have all the stuff, right? And all the other major distributions, of course, have abundant this vintage and retro stuff. But even with 100% test coverage, as I said, next month can sometimes something come out, or beside 100% test coverage is an illusion anyway. I would say we definitely need, obviously, microkernel, but otherwise it is really crazy, right? And very few people say this. I probably, of course, not everyone is an engineer or a system designer or system architect, but for me it is really crazy, right? And this is also why I obviously started this YouTube channel, to spread a little bit more critical thinking, because all the other people probably, or like most of the other people, just like copy some Unix system and don't, I don't know, sure, a lot of people think what could be done better, but I mean, obviously it's not there with 1,952 distributions 30 years later, and probably 10,000, if not 100,000 engineers working on Linux with all the hobby and companies over 30 years. But that is the best that is there. It's I don't know. It's not my thing. It's what it is. Yeah. So this has came out, and udev built-in came out. Yeah. So we have that one here, and I'm pretty. Why is it udev ADM though? udev D. Okay. Why is udev ADM another? Or maybe it is querying module information and aliases and stuff potentially. So yeah, but as udev is using libkmod whatever, is it called like that? Let's double check this as well. It's only the fact-checking YouTube channel here, because even I can't remember all this random stuff. Yeah, libkmod, of course it's called like that. Even I can't know and remember and stuff each of all those crazy libraries. Of course we have drop frames, 0.3%. Yeah, my dream would be a really amazing like thing, QNX on steroids, because obviously QNX not the most developed. Sure, there have been microkernels. QNX was a pretty good one. It's a pity it's neither the most further developed nor open source and stuff. It's in general, I said this before, a previous video on the main channel, right? That Linux kill all the OS innovation, because everyone, instead of creating a new amazing system like BOS, like Haiku or other, everyone is just creating Linux distribution, because I mean, it's a low-hanging fruit, right? Just take some stuff, rebrand it, and call it your own. And like not, sure they have is other stuff, ReduxOS, also microkernel, Dragonfly BSD and stuff, but as I said before, what is with the BSDs? They are even more conservative than Linux. Yeah. Yeah, welcome everyone. Just some summary of the day. And quick question, what is hot on ftrace? What do you mean with f? What exactly is the use source there? How are you all doing today? What do you mean, voice is so soft compared to other days or something? Maybe I try to keep calm when it's so annoying that after 25 years. Not really, I don't know. Maybe this is my normal voice. Not the most, except getting a little bit tired of peak bugs, hashtag, right? Usually we reserve hashtag peak bugs for macOS bugs or Windows bugs, but yeah, Linux too. So we wanted to check, did I copy that correctly enough? I potentially did. Why does it, or is it some generated thing? Thank you very much. Okay, let's maybe look for kmod. Maybe it's they built this apparently twice. Maybe they built it as also apparently it. I guess from experience from the log and that most likely they built it twice. Once for udev ADM and once for udev D. What do we have here? Load module. Here we have that. Yeah. So I mean, we could YOLO that in between everything. So as you see, this only by the way, as we did check this already. So one thing is, of course, do we have the file system mounted read-write? Because usually most systems usually start booting read-only for file system check and so on. And udev ADM trigger. So do we have that mounted? Yeah, mounting local file system. So yeah, we have basic stuff. I mean, what I would implement would not solve that for the initRD. So very early booting, but also we have only like the safest and most basic modules in there. Sure, it can also happen there. That is of course a problem, that you start in the initRD loading stuff, and if that fails and catches fire, although in my experience it's mostly the video driver because they have been garbage and less than stellar for decades. It's just what it is. Ask your next local Linux wizard, Greybeard or like Gandalf or Alan Cox or something. But the quality and vintage heritage of. Yeah, I mean, with Phoronix always applauding when they want to delete fbdev, which I'm not the most pleased with either. You can guess what has been the state of Linux video drivers for decades. Danny, welcome there. Let's see. Pedro says the longer work in IT, the more I prefer having things just working here. I mean, me too, right? I don't want to work on broken stuff. I mean, who wants to work on broken stuff? I mean, everyone, my usual car analogies, you can debug strange Linux, other IT problems over a weekend and manage nothing. My recurring example here, you can polish your vintage Beetle, Volkswagen bus or whatever, and scratch off some rust and fix some dents, and after some hours you see what you've done. With this vintage, especially C code and single address space and crashing stuff, you can burn your weekend and still don't know why some bug happened and stuff. But in general, and this is also when you wonder why I want a microkernel, or why when I call out the lack of innovation and did Linux previous video, right? Did Linux kill all? I probably need to link them more often, so that was videos. And maybe I need to rename this channel to Critical Thinking and stuff, because yeah, all I wanted is some boot. I'm probably next the days. Yeah, as per usual, I have so much to do, and yeah, basically, if you wonder why do I make this live stream, if I do that next week, it doesn't have the live spirit, and if I do it next week, I might forget it, and then I have already a list of 50 video things I want to do, and more main channel, AAA pre-edited stuff, but time and stuff. So summarizing this stuff, advertising critical thinking and thinking out of the box, and not like accepting this 30 years plus of legacy Unix stuff of it is what it is. It always has been like this. It needs to be so because that is how the Unix classic vintage original Unix gods envisioned it to be. It's like, yeah. So yeah, this is what I wanted to check. This is read-writable. So I think I implement something like this. And the craziest thing is, like if this would be Lua and stuff, so the problem is with C, it's of course relatively annoying to program, right? And this is the other thing of C is also not amazing. Rust and Go, but it's neither written in Rust or Go or Lua or stuff. So we would need to open the file. Actually, it's not the most difficult. It's only, so we would basically, so we have here load module. It's probably built in kmod. Needs to reinstantiate. So, I mean, we have to, as per usual, there are multiple ways to implement this if we would want to implement that. maybe I do it another day though. Maybe I probably take my PowerBook, because I said it also in some days ago video, if you collect some vintage and retro stuff, which obviously I have for some 10, 20 systems or so, 2 dozen of systems, you sometimes need to maintain and charge the batteries, right? I have the problem, I have some nice vintage stuff, like even a 10-year-old ago MacBook Pro that I only switch on every 5 months, and then the battery dies, right? So actually a good chance to take out the tie book. And although otherwise it works, right? So people in our Discords, like someone with an iBook and this person with a PowerBook, otherwise, I mean, except this hang on the PowerBook. Yeah, so, and it's such an easy thing, right? Could we do this somehow differently? The problem is that you could do this in shellcode. I mean, theoretically you could. I mean, do you always need to do everything in shellcode? No. Do you need to do everything in C? Of course, also not. I would find that this kind of stuff, this for like control logic stuff, I mean, in general, I don't prefer or find C reasonable. C is really outdated and so on. In previous times, when we called modprobe, you could have done this like in a modprobe, like save modprobe wrapper, even in shellcode, like writing to a file, flushing that, f-syncing that, then only modprobe if it's not in there. Maybe you could have even done this, because you can do a little bit of stuff in this udev rules. But I wonder if you could purely do that in, where is even the mod probe? Probably not in here. Probably there might even be a, where would that be? Libudev in our rules D. Oh, crazy. Is it really hard coded? Maybe that is even keyboard module check. Run, interesting. Is this oh man, mod probe maybe. Crazy. Yeah, some really long time ago, like 10, 15 years ago, when this udev stuff was new, it's a young folks among the subscribers and viewers might not even know that this udev stuff is new. Before that, we didn't even have udev. This was statically, totally uninnovative, not even live. Before there was devfs, which was a dynamic representation of k-object kind of based devices in the kernel. Before that, which also super controversy, probably as controversy as systemd, and before that it was simply static file system device nodes in your X2 file system, right? Super crazy outdated stuff. So you couldn't even see in /dev what is really there and what isn't. It was simply special files with minor and major minor number. Yeah, very theoretically, I'm not sure how much you could script here. Maybe it's due to the way it's probably quite built in nowadays, that maybe you can't. Otherwise, previously there was like for modules then run. There was like 15 years ago, there was a rule. If module and stuff and nothing else and last rule and whatnot, then run modprobe. And theoretically, you could have even scripted that in a udev rule, but maybe that is next to impossible now, given the nature of that, I guess. Anyway, maybe I toy around with that another day. It's not the super most important thing today. I only wanted to share that it's rather ridiculous, in my opinion, that the state of module loading and no safeguards, but yeah, Linux is not about safeguards. It's single monolithic rest base, everything in one kernel and privilege mode, and What else did I wanted to say? And JIT, right? eBPF, extended Berkeley packet filtered JIT stuff in the kernel, because totally safe. Not. What else do we have there? Recently discovered that Dracode, the bootloader, is basically a small functioning Linux distro, by the point even including Bluesnow. Interesting. Yeah, I mean, I said this the previous video with the PS3 booting with kboots, certainly probably the PS3 other OS innovated, and that, like, should we support kexec and booting with our own initRD more, but kind of probably this is what you're saying. Is it a normal? It sounds like this is a normal Dracode. Is it even the bootloader? It sounds more that this is some initRD generation. It's not, I wouldn't call this a bootloader. This is just part of some distributions initRD generation progress, I guess. I wouldn't call it a bootloader, but thanks for mentioning that. Pedro asks, how feasible is it to have purely software video driver that does not crash? Would having a module like that fallback solve the problem? No, I mean, we have that already, right? It would not solve the problem, because the problem is that usually this crashes, it accesses the hardware, and like accessing the hardware crashes, for example. So, I mean, we have this like software fallback, it's running, and then when the real driver takes over, like I'm not even, as I said, even I don't see, you know, what's that, right? Could be a Radeon, FB, Radeon, whatever. We could check though which one we built in, because of course I don't know. But so it doesn't solve that, because that was running until the real driver crashed it, right? So either you would need a microkernel, but as I said, unfortunately, I'm totally aware, I'm not a total noob and dumb ass here, that a pure microkernel wouldn't necessarily solve that entirely. It would solve 90% of the problems, but I'm aware that there is like a 10% chance of certain hardware access. Like if your GPU crashes in such a way, even like, and locks the bus, whether it's like the PCI bus, could not respond to some transactions anymore, then I would also not design the PCI bus. I was really wondering what the Intel engineers were, or Intel and other engineers were thinking in the 90s. I would have designed, maybe they were thinking our hardware never crashes, probably, or like our hardware never crashes when the drivers are bug-free and never access complex hardware peripherals in a way that would deadlock them. But maybe hardware engineers should know better. What did I want to look up? All right, I wanted to check what we built in there, probably for the most part anyway. And yeah, I guess that answers the question. So what do we even build in? So this should have Radeon. We have DRM Radeon. We have frame buffer. I mean, it is possible. I mean, maybe we should not have FB Radeon in there. Although I think maybe I re-enabled that. And maybe the module is in, I don't know what they try to blacklist. Maybe Radeon. Yeah, that is Radeon FB. It could be that I re-edited that when I realized that the Radeon driver doesn't work for all. But again, as there is no status, I mean, if I would, sure, this is my Linux distribution, but I also need to work with what is otherwise in the upstream, and unless I finally write my revolutionary and vaporware and stuff microkernel. But as we need to work with, or don't need to, but certainly don't want to rewrite everything from scratch, not invented here, working what is and making best use of what is upstream. If this would be totally my innovation, or invention, I would also print it some status, right? Might not be the most pretty, of course, one line per driver would be super annoying, would be enough to print that. I mean, yeah, it doesn't entirely fit into the concept of printing that from there or stuff, but because the problem is that udev ADM triggers that, and then the events are processed. But I mean, theoretically, yeah, you could syslog and you could syslog to the console. It doesn't fit in there the best, but that is a design system architecture challenge, right? It's not like as a product designer, I mean, besides maybe wanting it totally graphical like Apple's macros or stuff, as a whole product designer and UI and UX designer, I would say I want some status, so if something goes wrong, at least also product support, right? Calling to Oracle or IBM, broken Linux, like yeah, my system's hanging, can't even tell them with a telephone diagnosing what's going on here. So from that perspective, I would want some status output. Not the most easy to get some nice, pretty output in there, but maybe then this udev setup should have been designed a little bit differently or so. But yeah, so that's probably it for the summary. Otherwise, I could work here on that and stuff. Also, we have 577 drop frames because it's Vodafone's fading DOCSIS stuff. I discussed it already double and triple as long as it, but that is always a problem, right? I present something for 10 minutes and we discuss it for 20 minutes and then the live stream is 30 minutes and then people don't like to watch it. This is the reality of hanging out here together and discussing stuff live on YouTube. And that's probably it for this video. I go catch my titanium book and see what happens for me. I anyway wanted to document the loading from a USB stick. So where's my USB stick? Somewhere it should be. All right, I put it away. And as usual, leave in the comments below what you think, right? What is your experience? How often has your Linux not booted? How often has your Linux crashed, stalled, hang, catched fire, hold and catched fire? How often have you guru meditated? What is your opinion about the state of desktop Linux and status output and splash screens? Looking forward to read that. Hope you learned something and see you next time for more fun stuff to come. One more question. Thanks for the explanation. Couldn't you just save the state before enabling accessing hardware, and if it fails, restore state? No, as I said, if that card, and I had this when I did the low-level stuff, multiple times when I did the low-level stuff of even, maybe not the Verge, oh no, maybe even the Verge. The problem is you can totally deadlock your whole system, right? You write to the card and nothing happens, and like nothing, no transaction moves on your PCI bus anymore. And then your CPU is stalled and halted. I'm not sure if you can recover on a, maybe potentially, if you have a single CPU system, that CPU is then for sure in a write to PCI bus, waiting for IO completion, that never completed, that is deadlocked. I'm not sure if you, yeah, you CPU and bus interface would probably be already have to be designed differently. I'm not sure, I'm not so deep in regularly PCIe. I'm also not sure if in such a regular PCI bus, if a SMP, symmetric multiprocessing, dual core, dual processor, I would think your second CPU should probably still be running, although maybe that depends on your chipset. I mean, maybe your chipset, yeah, long story short, it's complicated, needs to have extremely low-level research. I'm also not sure if that can happen on the PCIe. Maybe delayed PCI transactions can change something, but this are extremely low-level stuff that even low-level developers like myself don't usually work with. It is like low-level stuff that very few kernel developers probably know and have ever worked with. I also don't know if the same can happen on PCIe. If that is, I mean, in general, the concept is the same, just serialized, high-speed serial instead of good old-fashioned parallel stuff. A lot of the transaction details are still kind of sort of at times the same, but would probably need to experiment with a modern NVIDIA or AMD or 3D Labs PCIe thing there, if that can lock this. But again, if access to your hardware locks the system bus, whatever that might be, and your CPU is halted and catches fire, then there is no save and state restoring. But yeah, otherwise good thinking, but yeah, unfortunately not. Okay, one more off-topic thing. But yeah, hope that answered that. Was off-topic. Main computer, phone combo. Are you using personal stuff, not business? As a phone, I use a Samsung Galaxy S10e. I don't like larger phones. Already 2 years old, I use this stuff until it falls apart. And I mean, I kind of work so much that I don't like really have like a personal computer kind of sort of anymore. So my main workstation that, I mean, either I work or I sit with my family. And when I work, then, I mean, I can't even work the most at home anymore with like having a 2-year-old jumping around for 2 years. So if I work, then I go to the office and like can concentrate, and then I'm on this workstation. And this workstation is a previous video overkill build, so AMD Ryzen 5950X, overkill, liquid cooled and undervolted and curve optimized and stuff, with obviously my own T2 Linux, because I'm certainly not running one of the other 1952 or broken Oracle Linux. So yeah, see you next time.